And welcome everyone to Brain Swap for Friday and team, where today we are talking about ownership of anime.
So let me swap my brain.
My brain's actually in a vat somewhere.
Yeah. With Donovan. Donovan's brain.
There is actually a D&D creature called the Brain in a Jar. It's a lot of fun.
Brain in a jar.
We'll have to fight those at some point.
Wow, we've got a full room of folks already.
Hello, everyone.
Howdy.
So today our topic is about the ethics around buying anime versus not buying anime, right? So buying it on disc, buying a subscription, renting anime, getting it on iTunes, whatever, and sort of paying for it relative to consuming it for free.
How much anime should you own on?
Well, I guess own on disc or digital, because
what does it mean to own? I mean, because if I feel like I owned it if I watched the whole thing, all the features, I know the names. I don't have to own the disc at that point because I can say this is this character, that character. I kind of feel like I own it, but I don't.
So in here, we're talking about financial investment. I think it would be more the idea that
purchase.
Right. We all understand that purchasing something, that money then goes to the original artist at some point in some way, in some amount. And so that's a generally good thing. So, what is kind of the ethics around that?
Well, the straightforward seems a little bit fuzzy. Yeah. Everything seems pretty simple initially. But
so what's that kind of straightforward argument?
Well, if you own it, is that pre-streaming it days or streaming it post after you've streamed it and you've purchased a hard copy, Blu-ray, disc, VHS?
So I would say
bootleg.
So I would say we're talking about any legitimate purchase or rental or subscription. So either buying it on DVD, buying it on iTunes, so you have the physical copies or the digital copies rather, a subscription to Crunchyroll or Funimation, or renting it. I would say even Netflix. Like if you have a Netflix subscription and you're streaming it, still you're streaming it legally.
That legitimately gets money back to the authors.
Right, exactly.
Or credit or something somehow. Yeah. How much? All of it. Is it possible? Really? I'd like to. It's an ideal, but it's something that people can't necessarily attain to because our voracious appetites for anime.
Well, that's the thing.
And there's so many obscure titles that there is no legitimate channel for, or the legitimate channel has yet to be established.
Yeah.
It becomes tricky. So how much? That is a good question.
So we can certainly say that, if you want to watch Plaures Sanshiro, which is a plastic model kit fighting show from the early 80s, I think. It was never licensed in America. It probably never will be. It's quite obscure, but it's been fan subbed. I think downloading a fan sub of that and watching it, while technically a gray area, I don't know about you, I wouldn't feel particularly morally problematic about watching that and getting that. Like, I think that's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
And then there's pirating.
And that's
when things get interesting.
That's when things get interesting. There's certain anime that you're not going to find on the market anywhere in the US. And the only way you can get it is from that one torrent that has 2 people in the entire world, and they're only coming through 14K from Australia. Thank you, friends in Australia, for putting it there. But it's an obscure title that had some fundamental impact, and that's the only way that you're going to get it. Granted, when you get it, it's subbed in 8 different languages, and hopefully this is something that you'd love to share, but then you always worry about the content police.
Yeah.
Even if it is something that you can't get anywhere, you can't find.
So yes, I think reasonable people agree that downloading something that's not available to you at all is understandable, at least. I certainly wouldn't look down on anyone who does that. I do it all the time. Although it should be said that there is an argument against that. There are people who say that you shouldn't download it no matter what. You should just watch something else.
Hardcore.
Legitimate.
Wow.
If there's so much stuff available legitimately that you shouldn't even consume something because that is still a moral infraction.
This is an interesting concept. Kaminoko says, my rule is if I like it enough to watch it a third time, it's worth buying.
Okay.
How many times have you bought anime just to watch it once and then it sits on the shelf versus
dozens of times?
So, yeah, same here. Although,
and some I haven't watched at all.
There's so much anime, so little time. But if I've watched something 3 times and I still want to watch it again, that's definitely something that says to me, I've got to get this. I like it enough to watch it this many times.
And that's exactly where the morality gets into it, is that, especially for anime where like we're not in a setting. So like in Japan, if you don't want to pay for it, then you just watch it during its original run on television.
Yeah.
Right. Or you DVR it or whatever. And so you have a chance to check it out without shelling out money.
Yeah, it's already paid for by the TV station that's airing it. And
you got the advertisements and all that. Totally understandable.
But that's appointment TV. You have to schedule when you're going to be there. You watch it when it's on.
Well, not really. I mean, everyone has DVR.
I mean, DVR. Yeah, I suppose there is that. Modern age, Evan.
But the point being that, whether you do appointment television or not,
it's free.
It's free
at that point. Yeah,
we don't really have that over here.
Well, maybe our second season of Fooly Cooly will be that way.
Well, yeah, and to that point, there is a fair amount of anime showing on television, so there's a bit of that bouncing around. But for the vast majority of titles, we don't have that option. So then the question becomes, okay, how many times are you watching the illegitimate copy before it becomes reasonable for you to buy it? And that's where it gets kind of tricky. You are consuming material that somebody else spent a lot of time and money into, and they need some financial, remuneration.
So the not legitimate copy comes in different levels of not legitimate. Not legitimate because there's a fan sub and there's nothing released in the US. Not legitimate and there is something released in the US. Not legitimate and it was obviously ripped at the highest quality setting to get the most detail of everything with all the features and everything. ISO. Which is the greatest thing to be able to have quality. However, it's the epitome of piracy. Because it's not even putting in effort to. Now, granted, some titles go out of print.
Sure.
Or there's a different version that gets released, and then you can't see the earlier version.
Especially true with anime. Yep.
So what do you do then at that point? Well, there's eBay, but I mean, do the original creators there's the punishment side and then there's the ethical side. Punishment side, most people are probably going to get away with it. But the ethical side is really the moral conscience of people. And that, I think, is what really helps drive the industry, because most anime fans are pretty reasonable. They'll watch something, but if they really like it, they'll go out and get it. And I think that helps fuel the industry. And I think that's one of the great things.
Well, and that gets to one of the other issues, which is that buying it, and again, that could be a subscription or whatever. Although let's kind of ignore the subscription for now. So buying either a physical copy or a digital copy, or renting it, where it's tied specifically to the title, right? That sends a much more powerful message to the original creators and staff than numbers of torrents.
Oh yeah, much more. I mean, torrents are a little bit harder to keep numbers on and report legitimately.
And and you're exactly right. And that's the thing, is that even if they had stats, why would they care? Right? Okay, lots of people are torrenting it, but then does that mean that making more of it is going to make them any more money? Unknown. Whereas if sales and to that point, the used market, I think if sales of the DVDs are suddenly now $100, $200 on the used market, that's going to send a much stronger message.
But again, the same thing with the torrents. Who's keeping track of the used market? I love to go to anime shows where people are reselling discs that they've watched and they're not watching anymore because I can get a real good deal. And part of me feels like, you know, I can spend the money and watch a show that I might not like or have no idea about because it's used. But then part of me is saying, well, they're not going to be able to record this as something that contributes to their sales. It's a resale, so you can't really measure and track the resale market. You know, somebody, hey, I've got all these, you know, fan swap basically.
Yeah.
And
well, I would say the industry can track the resale market as easily as they can track the torrent market. I mean, you can always go on eBay and see what the going prices are for any given thing.
As long as it's posted online, Craigslist.
Yeah, and you know, we know that industry insiders frequently, I was going to say troll, walk through fan conventions. They troll fan conventions sometimes too.
Yeah.
But they'll walk through fan conventions and they'll look at, you know, what's selling, what's not selling, what are people making art of, what's the big hot thing.
Yeah.
Now
keeping their finger on the pulse of what's going on. They want to know just like the rest of us.
Now, Derpy in the chat room asks, do you think you should purchase, sorry, just scrolled up. The chat room's going too fast.
So much cheddar. Yes.
Should you purchase shows you don't like? Like there are some really trashy shows like Rail Wars where you watch it for a laugh, but you wouldn't want them to produce more of it. I don't
like this. I don't want to see more.
I don't watch shows that I don't like. If I'm watching it, I like it at some level.
I sometimes do. I watch a show. I like to devour an entire series, and it's rare that I will give up on a series before I go. It is a problematic thing because it means that I'm investing myself in a whole series. I usually watch because I'm hoping that the animators, the production crew, the story will all pick up its stride. If it's slow in the beginning, who knows, it might pick up. They might get their groove and really turn it into something I like, or a plot twist, or suddenly, you know, what I thought was one genre is now a different kind of story altogether. Sometimes I'm pleased. Sometimes I'm thinking, why did can I play this faster to get through it sooner? Because it's just, but it's a rare occasion for me to not watch a whole series once I start it. But I sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll abandon and sometimes it's just lack of time to finish.
So here's the thing. I would say, on the one hand, well, I don't think that's something that's worth getting worried about. You know, I wouldn't get too concerned over the fact that purchasing an anime series that you turned out to not adore might possibly cause another season of that thing. It's like, well, then that means there's more anime. You know, fair enough. I think that supports the industry as a whole. It supports that show as well, but it's not a terrible thing to cause there to be an anime series that you're, like you said, you get a laugh out of, but is not, you know, the next Full Metal Alchemist.
There's a lot of anime being produced every year, and each season has its own batch of multiple shows, and it would be fun to see. I think Crunchyroll has the best model right now of having a quick turnaround for English subbing, so that they can tell based on their users what the newer titles are that are hot, that people will watch a second season or a third season. And I think that data is going to be really important for what gets licensed. And I bet you that a lot of the folks in the licensing areas, and there's bunches of those from Sentai and Funimation and several independent groups that go and look at whatever they can for licensing. I bet they're going to look at that information if they can get to it and say, hey, you know, this is hot with the Americans. This is not. We'll spend a little bit more and try and get the license for this, or a little bit less on that. And it kind of makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. If I were running any of those companies, I can think of no stronger indication of the potential sales for a show than how well that's doing on Crunchyroll or Funimation or whatever, you know, the legit streaming sites. Because and this gets to something else where one of the so there's that argument that torrents indicate that something is popular, and so people will tend to make more of that. What's turning out to be more true is that there are multiple kinds of consumers and fans of a thing. And what people are finding out is that people who go and, for example, only download Doctor Who, for example, and never buy it, they often will not buy Doctor Who. You know, you can put out a box set, they're just not going to buy it. But they're willing, there's another class who they may download those torrents, but they're willing to buy it if it becomes available to them.
Yes.
So the people who have a subscription to Crunchyroll, for example, are the ones who are saying, hey, I'll spend the $5 a month, or $8 a month, whatever it is, to ignore the commercials and have a good experience. They're much more likely, you know, once that license runs out, to say, hey, you know, you can't get on Crunchyroll anymore, but now you can get a box set of it. I'd be interested in that.
That makes sense. I can just imagine the folks looking at the market saying, these people are motivated enough to pay for it in the stream format. They're motivated and they'll pay.
Yeah.
And so somebody who's motivated and will pay is definitely more of a market than somebody who's motivated to never pay.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no market there.
Exactly. And there's a lot of that. Yeah. Now, Derby brings up another good point.
I love the spines.
About merchandising. The fact that we have a difference in America versus Japan. You know, in Japan, the original desire is to push sales of the original product, original manga, what have you. Most of the money is being made off of DVD and then other merchandise.
I have those VHS Ball Z and other ones over looking at the picture. At some point, maybe I can swap with people if they have parts missing.
There we go.
Pictures.
Yeah. VHS was nice. You had nice wide tapes. You could actually see a lot. You could put stuff on there
across the bookshelf.
Exactly. But yeah, so that also complicates it. Where over here there's not a lot of other merchandise that sales or watching of anime can actually support. Right. So you know, even if the pirated or other legitimate stuff had somewhere else to go, there's nowhere else for it to go over here. You know, in Japan, at least you could say, well, I'm renting the anime, but I'll go back and read the original manga. You know, I'll buy the manga. Over here, the manga generally doesn't come out, or only a few volumes of it come out, or whatever.
That does make it tricky.
It does. It's a lot harder to push that, and again, and this is how it's all the big old circle of life. Which is, people have tried bringing out the original light novels, and they definitely haven't sold very well. Manga, okay, but light novels have been successful over here.
Maybe it's people are not as familiar with the concept of the light novel.
True,
and it may just take time.
Yeah,
and as more folks get into the industry and realize that there's no drawings in this.
Yeah, they had this problem when Spice and Wolf came out over here, and they started doing the novels. They did completely different covers on the novels because the original covers were lovely, but they were kind of anime style covers, and the covers in America were these more painterly style, relatively abstract covers. And there was some hue and cry about how dare you change that. And they said, here's the problem: when people see that anime style art, they assume it's a manga.
Expect,
right, and you know, it will sit on that shelf, and the you know, the readers are not going to pick it up. Only the manga folks will pick it up. So to get that audience, I remember when Orson Scott Card was when he submitted Ender's Game to the publisher, he wanted a picture of a young boy on the cover, Ender, and the publisher said, "That's nice," and they put a starship on the cover. And he's like, "No, it's about a young boy. It's not about spaceships." Right. And the editor said, "Yes," and we sold umpteen billion copies of that thing because the cover said science fiction, and it appealed to the science fiction fans.
That completely makes sense. Yes, it was about, but it's definitely true that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Nonetheless, people do.
Right.
And so don't judge it by its cover, but even if you do, still open it up because
well, and the cover is what entices people to pick it up and check it out. You know, we all know the whole goal of this is to get people to actually try the first page of the book, right? To actually read the content and see if it's for them.
Do you think that, speaking of reading content and seeing if it's for them, D points out, asks, aren't the light novels better targeted to a female audience?
Why would that be?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen as many guys pick up light novels, but then I haven't seen as many guys reading. So I don't know.
I see in my social media streams, I have more male readers than female readers, especially of science fiction and fantasy.
So with a light novel, that makes me wonder, as far as manga and light novels, what the majority of the demographic is.
Certainly for manga, it tends to be more female oriented. Manga for women tends to sell, or women tend to buy more manga than men. But yeah, I don't know about fiction.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. It's a good question. So I guess that we'd have to break it down into light novels in the U.S. Light novels.
And for what it's worth, I'm talking about my social media, my anime social media. I'm talking about like my geek social media stuff. So it's not just anime fans. Because you're right, the online, like especially like the online YouTube anime thing tends to be predominantly male. In fact,
everybody on the internet is a man.
Well, that's the funny thing. It's not true.
Not true.
Well, we're looking at demographics for the channel, and it's overwhelmingly male. Maybe because we're both dudes. Maybe just to say. So yeah, but it's an interesting question as to whether gender is part of it. There's also a question of the general marketing aspect of light novels as to whether guys or girls get what the light novel is. We certainly see a huge market for in the romance genre for women. Lots of women read those. So who knows? That's hard to say.
It would be fun to get a female co-host and maybe bounce off some of these ideas off of us.
Sure, exactly.
I never think like that. Feedback.
Yeah, it's that's one of the things that makes this whole ethical question complicated, because it's a question of kind of who are you supporting with those dollars. And of course, we must address the elephant in the room that when you're buying a DVD box set, a very tiny percentage of that goes back to the original studio or the original creators. But that's a factor in any
everything, kind of packaging, shipping, printing, distribution, marketing, managing, keeping track of inventory. The actual duplication and print. There's it goes on.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the fact that very little of it goes back means that something goes back, as opposed to pirating it where nothing goes back.
And when the something that goes back directly, there's some things that go back indirectly. Your stuff sold. Here's a compensation, and we're going to continue to do business with you because your stuff sells.
Exactly.
And so there's future business
and as we talked about before, generally, the anime studio is not going to make any money off of your copy of that, but it will, as you say, cause more people to go to that anime studio to make more anime. So it's good in general. So yeah, as Dee says, if you buy mecha anime, Sunrise will make more anime because obviously it's working.
How many copies of Azumango Daioh can I buy? I love that series.
And that's a legitimate point. There are people who will go out and buy multiple copies of something they love to show more support for it.
In fact, I've heard otaku in Japan will quite frequently buy multiple copies. One for the pristine in package, one for the player, and one for the friend that they can loan out. So if they lose it or damage it or whatever, it doesn't destroy their...
Absolutely. I own at least 2 copies of Serial Experiments Lain.
I almost did.
And I own every printed thing about that, including one book in 2 different versions. Again, because I'm like, hey, yeah, sure, I'll absolutely support it.
When you're a fan, you're a fan.
You're a fan. Well, and let's address that aspect of it too. There was a time when fandom implied a certain financial investment. So if you were a Star Trek fan, that meant that you bought lots of Star Trek stuff. You built a big collection of stuff. Part of that was because that was the only way you could actually consume it. You know, there were very few illegitimate ways of consuming Star Trek stuff. Is that still a factor?
You know, it's kind of tricky. I would think to some degree, yes. People invest emotions and time and money, but in different directions. So if a person cosplays as a character, they're still a fan, but it's not necessarily working its way back to the content creator in as direct a route as buying the DVD of the character that they're portraying. So they may end up, you know, giving publicity to the character at a convention by cosplaying it, but they're giving their money to the materials and they're giving publicity when they're designing it and making it. But as far as so they are a fan, but and there is an investment.
Yeah.
But the investment is not necessarily correlated back to the creation or to the creator. So it's not as much of an homage.
And I think that's a very important and subtle distinction, is that you can invest a lot of money in something, not necessarily having it go back to the original folks, but still the fact that you're spending money on it is it's a significant thing. You're spending money on it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's awesome when folks are like, you know, I'm spending every last dime. Maybe it's not on the DVDs, but it's on, you know, materials or this prop or, you know, whatever. I think that's definitely a significant thing. I don't know. Now, we talked before a bit, but I'd like to circle back to the topic of sort of buying a copy that you own and control versus essentially renting.
Yes.
So there's DVDs, there's I'm trying to remember, is there any service where you actually buy just a file, a video file? I don't think there is any now. Like on Amazon for MP3s, you have a copy, but I don't think for video.
The model, I think they got away from that because keeping track of it once it was out there was, you could become like a one copy country. One person buys it, everybody gets
it. Right. Yeah, you see some of the stats on that, and it's like, wow. But yeah, so I think that's an interesting distinction.
There was a service that they were trying to get started called Ultraviolet, which was where you'd buy a license.
All right.
And it would give you permission for 4 different things, like your TV, your laptop, your cell phone, and some other device. And all you would have to do is have this license, and you could get it, the stream of it wherever, or physical copy. But because you paid for Ultraviolet, you got it for multiple formats.
Yeah, that really took off for some reason.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately,
TV.
It's one of those things where, unfortunately, that happens to be between two convenient options. One is just buying it so you just always have it, versus getting a subscription to Netflix where you have access to a billion things.
Owning versus accessing.
Right. And the idea of kind of having this stream that you could put on certain devices and it gave you access to it just feels too much like a hybrid solution. Much as I think it's a neat idea. I would like to see that kind of thing explored, but I think unfortunately it didn't really work. But yeah, it's interesting. So I think there's something to be said for the difference between buying a copy to own versus having a subscription that allows you to legitimately stream and watch it. But I think those are both definitely legitimate ways of supporting the industry.
They have been merging closer and closer, and but there's a having a physical copy. The streaming side is also has its own benefits of, I'm going to be able to play this on device after device. And most likely I won't have to transcode it to a different format just so I can play it on this thing. And I will have it anywhere I have an internet connection, which is becoming more and more pervasive these days.
Oh, totally.
And so it's probably not going to be something that you'll be able to get on your camping trip at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
But if you're up the mountain, you should be paying attention to not falling off the mountain and not anime at that point.
Right.
Maybe at night in the tent.
And also you have the advantage that, as we've been seeing, various devices, I mean, you can't put a DVD in an iPad. So there are lots of devices where you need to stream. Or you're off somewhere and all you have is your phone. And you're like, I would like to watch the next episode of that thing, right here, because I'm sitting in a parking lot waiting for something.
Yeah.
And you can't stick the DVD in.
This bus station has a delay, or this subway system has a delay. Okay, now's a perfect time to catch up.
Yep. Heading to the airport, whatever.
Redeem the time.
Yeah. Now, granted, and I'm so glad you brought up how these things are converging, because fortunately, the industry is getting better at tracking that and essentially legitimizing those streams. And it used to be that the fact that they were on Crunchyroll and up there was nice, but wasn't a significant impact on the industry. Now they can actually see those numbers and say, okay, this is, it's 4,000 streams for this versus 6,000 for that. That has more feedback. And so that, because let's be honest, that $10 a month for the Crunchyroll subscription averaged out doesn't have a huge impact.
There's a fantastic benefit for that kind of statistics and tracking with streaming that you don't get with a DVD. So if I watch my favorite DVD 8 or 9 times, they don't know that.
Yeah, true.
Where if I watch the stream 8 or 9 times, they're saying, this is popular. They like this. Somebody's watching this, and they're watching a lot. It could be multiple somebodies. It could be one somebody. The fact is, they got eyeballs on it each time, and that's that almost says more to the amount of attention that's given to it rather than the number of people. But at the same time, it's a better metric, because the resale market for streaming is not.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Where with DVDs, I'm the third person who owned this disc, and everybody enjoyed it as much as they did, and then passed it on.
Totally. Now, Fisher brings up in the chat room, one of the nice things about buying a series is it can be a link to your childhood. Rewatching a series as an adult can take you back to that moment as a kid, that feeling you can't put a price on. And that is true. I mean, and it's one of the downsides of the streaming side of it is that thing that you watch and enjoy may not be there a year from now.
Yeah, they don't keep everything online.
Yeah.
And that's very frustrating when I go back to my Hulu list and I'm like, I had all these great things that I wanted to watch and they're gone now. I mean, what do I do? Even my list is gone. So there is that. So there's an ephemeral aspect to how much media they're going to actually keep spinning.
Yep.
Because it costs money to keep that on a hard drive somewhere that's spinning, and collectively it reduces the cost when everybody accesses it. But stuff that doesn't get a lot of views is going to start to diminish in its value for the content provider to keep on that disc. They're going to want to put something that's going to get all sorts of throughput of people to keep customers. So that means if you have really good stuff but obscure, the less than super popular, it may fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
If the content providers got really smart, they do a nearline storage, and basically what that is kind of like, instead of having it on a spinning hard drive, they'll have it on a tape backup. If somebody wants to watch it, they're going to be motivated to wait a few seconds for the tape to be pulled out of the archive library, jammed into the tape reader, and then spun up onto the hard drive as a temporary caching system, and then played out as a stream. It takes longer to pull something off of that nearline storage.
Right.
But the value is they can keep a much deeper collection of videos. And if the streaming companies start doing that, then we can get massive archives without spending the electricity on spinning discs.
Maybe. That would be nice. It's really it'd be interesting to see if that would ever happen, because the issue there is not just storage, it's licensing.
So, sometimes bootlegs.
Yeah.
Bootlegs. Sometimes it's hard to tell what you're getting till you got it.
That's a very good point about buying online. And it's a really interesting thing because I should point out, anime fan for 20 years, been buying anime for 20 years, and I have had times when I have bought bootlegs and not realized it. Well, actually, I take that back.
I bought a bootleg recently, but I couldn't really look at it until I got it out of the shrink wrap, and I couldn't get it out of the shrink wrap till I bought it.
Yeah, actually, I can't think of a case where I personally bought a bootleg. I've had friends buy bootlegs, and I have bought bootlegs intentionally,
knowing.
So yes, yeah. I've had things where I'm like, well, so here's the story. Back before broadband, you'd have bootlegs out there for shows that were like fan subs, where it's like, okay, Turn A Gundam has never been released in America and not looking likely.
We have a bank of 8 VHSs churning these out.
Pretty much.
For you guys.
And you got an entire anime series for 50 episodes. Gosh, that's cheap.
If the price is too good, to be true, it usually is.
But that certainly had friends who were suckered, if you will, who couldn't tell the difference between a bootleg and a legitimate copy. So it is something to be aware of. You know, when you're not buying something, it's worth ensuring.
Take a look at it. If you're doing it on the internet, you might want to research the company. I found an anime company that was giving some great deals, but when I put my purchase through, they took forever. They couldn't contact me, and then I started doing some research on them, and I realized that the Better Business Bureau. I mean, I went to bbb.gov or com or whatever, betterbusinessbureau.org. These guys had an F rating. They were pretty much bandits. You know, they're pirating it. They're making unbelievable sales, but then they couldn't keep up with their demand or provide decent communications. That's usually a thing. If they're not giving you a good phone number or a good address or a good way of contacting you, or you contacting them, that's a red flag, big red flag. But if you're in person and you can actually look at the material, that's where you can develop certain clues for looking at it, where you know if a DVD is made, there's two ways of making a DVD or a CD for that matter. There's the stamped out mass produced versions, and then there's the recordable versions. And it's not always the case, but almost always the case that if something looks like a recordable disc, there is a high likely chance that it's a bootleg.
Yeah, you're probably not going to get a chance to see that disc, though.
And you're not going to get a chance to see. And no reputable manufacturer uses inkjet. They use silkscreen. They use
that can be hard
thermal
to tell,
retransfer.
though.
And again, you can't really tell until you open it up and that you're already past the point.
I would say the big things to look for are and I think that the biggest one, as you point out, is look at the company you're buying it from. You know, Google their name online and see what people talk about it. You know, Amazon is pretty reliable. Not always, but pretty. And to that point, actually, to delve a little deeper, Amazon will sell a lot of things. They will sell the original Japanese versions. They do occasionally bootleg sellers do creep onto Amazon for a while before they're kicked off. So you will occasionally see bootlegs in there. But you know, you may see this show and think, "Oh wow, it's the show," but it's actually a Japanese copy. Anyway, look for the subtitle option. Generally speaking, if you're buying it and it's subtitled in English and available in Japanese, and there's no English dub on the DVD, research that.
Yeah, that
most of the time, and there are certainly legitimate American releases that didn't have a dub,
but not a lot.
Not a lot. Yeah. So that's something to look into. And then also, again, I say look at the price and compare that to normal prices. And actually, another helpful thing to that point, look at prices for other shows. So, you know, you may find a show that is legitimately just cheap, but if you go on there and you're seeing that they're selling entire seasons of One Piece for $15, that's a sign.
Wow.
And that
always double check.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find a great deal, but always it pays to do your homework. Of course, unless you don't care whether it's a bootleg or not. I have some family members that up until the digital age, really didn't care about quality.
Yeah.
I can hear it through the static. I can see it through the static. No.
Mm-hmm.
But quality can make a difference. And if they're trying to put a lot of stuff onto a disc, they may compress it to the point where you see mosaics and tiles and all sorts of noise in the authoring. And that's because they're trying to get as much data onto a disc because they're not worried about quality. They're worried about.
Yeah. These days, I have a hard time finding a reason to defend, if you will, buying a bootleg, right? Like back in the day when it was really hard to download stuff, fair enough, or obviously, you live way out in the boondocks and maybe, but these days I would say if you're at all tempted, just get the fan sub. I mean, I'd rather you get a legitimate fan sub, and then you at least have the option to go and buy it than supporting a pirate who is just profiting off.
It's just sheer piracy. It's not fan based. It's not and the torrent is not making money off of it, where this person is making money off of ripping off the content creator.
Yeah, exactly.
And duping the customer, because the customers think that they're not, unless you're a savvy customer, you think, hey, this isn't a bootleg. You pay extra for it because it's convenient, and then suddenly, oh crap.
Yeah. And if you want to share it with friends, share the digital copies, put it on an SD card or something. I think that's better than the result. Now, great.
This is my bootleg. My other leg has
there we go. Now, something else brought up in the chat room, which I think is really helpful. Is there sort of an ethical aspect around getting a limited edition release versus the standard release?
If you see it, jump on it. You're not going to get a second chance. That's my ethic on it. Limited edition is nice, and if you're a fan of it, you know that you're getting something that you can appreciate. Well, if you've never seen it, though, well, that's a good question. If you know the series, you can appreciate that there's a limited edition.
Sure.
But if you don't know the series and that's the only copy you can get, I've run into the, well, should I get this? Well, it's the collector box set that has bells and whistles, and I'd have to pay a little bit extra, but there's no other cheaper copies of it. So what am I going to do? I don't know. I'm not going to pay the extra because I don't know the story yet. Then I watch the story. I want to get it. Box set's gone. Wow.
Yeah, and well, this gets into the fact that, I mean, I've certainly gotten limited edition box sets where I'm like, it certainly has stuff in there, but it wasn't worth the extra $40 or whatever.
So that can be kind of hit or miss.
Right.
I mean, if I'm really a fan of something, I'll pay for cardboard, which is kind of sad. But it's if you're really a fan of it, you can still enjoy that. That being said,
yeah, and I think that's something where, but getting back to that thing, when you're buying the limited edition, that sends an even stronger message back to the original producers to produce more of it.
Yeah.
That limited edition release, if that sells out quick, they're going to say, oh, okay, there's money to be made.
Yeah. There's not just fans who are consumers. These are fans who want that and more. It shows that desire.
Yeah. So I think it's my personal general approach to all that is find a way to buy it, however, makes sense for you. But there is something to be said that getting the most limited edition, most expensive version you can possibly afford has much more impact. Like, your dollar travels further, if you will, than just getting the cheapest, save edition.
My dollar is a vote.
Sure is. Yeah, that's kind of part of the thing. Oh yeah, we should probably talk about bootleg Korean anime at some point. That's a whole nother topic.
Korea.
Yeah. So what is your standard for purchasing?
That's a good question.
At what point do you buy it?
If I have watched a series, a lot of series I'll watch. I'll watch stuff on Adult Swim.
Okay. Yep.
And I think, oh, that's cool. But if I really get into it, I will go out and I may have seen the entire series, but I want more. Like Parasite, I haven't had a chance to get it yet, but I'm planning on getting Parasite. which is fantastic if you guys get a chance to see it. I'm probably going to have seen the entire series before I get this set. So if I saw a special box set, I'm going to jump on it. Had I not, I might get a save edition from some other, not that they do save because I think it's Sentai, but the conceptually, if something is in a save edition, I feel I can spend that amount of money and risk a little bit more because it's less expensive. So I'll risk getting a title that I have no idea about when it's in a save edition or inexpensive box set. But if I know the title and I really like the title, I will spend the money to get the better quality. That being said, I do a lot of DVD. I don't do that much Blu-ray. And I'm not sure that Blu-ray has been as much packaged with like bells and whistles, like T-shirts and characters and things like that. I mean, maybe, but most of the ones I see are usually packaged with DVD. So at some point, I might start getting Blu-ray.
Yeah.
But for me, up until now, DVD has been pretty well done. So I'd say I may still watch something on Adult Swim and not have that. I've got to get
it.
That being said, that's broadcast television. For stuff that's recommended as a friend or as if I go to a convention and somebody's talking at a panel about all these obscure animes, who could that be? I might get it because it's something that's really in my area, or I may just get a chance to watch it and decide for myself before I go out and purchase.
What about fan subs?
Fan subs, I do like fan subs sometimes, but if I'm going to the effort to watch a fan sub, usually I'm more motivated. It's before I've seen a license for it in the US.
Sure.
And at that point, I can decide whether it's really a show for me or not. And quite often I've gotten fan subs that I thought were fantastic fan subs. And I have been like champing at the bit to get the first US release. I don't even wait for the box set. They have 3 individual disc packages, and I'll get all 3 of those. Like Dojin work. As soon as I could get that, I got it. And people didn't even know the title when I was mentioning it to them at conventions. And so I think there's a place for fan subs.
Okay.
But I'm cautious not to advocate them as the main way of watching the anime because of that feedback loop.
So at what point in terms of watching fan subs will you then buy the show?
Usually after I've watched the series.
Okay. Interesting.
Because I like to devour the whole series. But sometimes I my wallet is a little thin, and I can't necessarily get the series when I want to. So in the meantime, sometimes the US will license it somewhere, and then I'll get an even better package than if I wanted to try and get just the Japanese version or pay for streaming. And now with Crunchyroll doing what they're doing, the potential for me seeing something subbed before it gets licensed in the US is fantastic, because then at least my feedback is going to at least generate interest. And I think that's where your model of watching anime is better, because my approach of watching an entire series, no matter how bad it sucks, excuse me, everybody, but
and that
gives them better feedback.
And that gets kind of to the differences in our approach, which I think are actually very similar. Is that we have different sort of cutoff points. Because I'll watch an anime series, and like I said, if I get a couple episodes into it and it's just not for me, I stop. If I get halfway through and it's not for me, I stop. And generally, well, it depends, but generally, if I hear about a show, I'm usually hearing about it before it's available in America. If it is available on Crunchyroll or Funimation or Hulu, I'll watch it there if I can. If not, I'll grab the fan sub. Then, if I watch more than usually 3 episodes, then mentally I find a way to buy it. Now, if I get 3 episodes in and like I enjoy it, but then so to be clear, if I watch at least 3 episodes and I'm not completely turned off, then I'm like, okay, I enjoyed this. I'm gonna find some way of buying maybe the budget edition when it comes out. I'll support it in some way, especially if it's $20 a budget edition. That's fine. I do sometimes watch things all the way through fan subbed. Haruhi Suzumiya was an example of that. Multiple times I watched that before it was available in America. And then when it came out, I buy it. So if I watch it all the way through fan subbed, I know I love it, and I will absolutely find a way of supporting that. And that's a case where I will usually try to find a nicer version, a more expensive version to support. But that's also a fan thing. I like it that much. I'm going to try to get the neatest version. One of the reasons I got the Haruhi box set was because they had it in both broadcast and chronological order. And it was really
That's
nice.
great, because then you have even more information. You can say, hey, I'll set up this playlist or that playlist.
Yep.
And then you can, as a fan, you can say, hey, I'm seeing this from this perspective, the way everybody was watching it when it first came out. And now I'm watching it in this perspective, which was a little bit different. And those kind of things are nice little perks to be able to enjoy.
Yeah.
Watching with friends
true.
is fantastic. Because I get reactions from them that I kind of get a different feel watching with other folks.
Sure.
Because I can see their emotions to things. And sometimes if I'm cruising the solar system or thinking about something, somebody will laugh or make a comment or a noise, and it draws my attention back to what's going on. I'm like, oh yeah, there. And
again, that's something where some folks believe that kind of ethically, if you're watching it with a group, you still should consider that to be kind of like a fan sub.
Yeah.
You haven't bought it, so you should be at least consider going back and buying a copy to support the industry. Again, gotta worth thinking about.
That breaks down into the whole can a church group watch the Super Bowl?
Right. Yeah. And it also gets into that whole question of just sort of generally. So there's the hardcore folks who say basically, as you mentioned in the beginning, you must only watch legitimate copies. If you can only find it illegitimately, then watch something else. Then there's the other side. Then there's the other extreme. Well, one other extreme within the fan community, the otaku community, that says, no matter how you consume it over here, you should buy a Japanese copy, because that is where most of the money goes most directly to the creators.
I like that idea, except that I like to see the US's influence on anime decisions, like the second season of Fooly Cooly, where what we're doing shows that we are consumers of this, and so I can see validity in both points.
Yeah.
There was a mention about fan subbers and the hierarchy of the fan subbing sort of machine, as it is, the people who go and set titles and proofread and the people who translate, and there's a lot of complexity to that. Fan subbers do a lot of work.
They sure do.
And what's funny is some of the folks who started in fan subbing actually end up going and working with the legitimate US licensors. So that skill is definitely something that can be accrued, and the effort to go to a more legitimate stage of that is very admirable, and there is a path for that.
Yeah.
That being said, there's still some things that are in the gray areas, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. Derpy, I remember that whole thing about terrible mid-2000s fan subs. That was actually really hilarious. There's a whole YouTube thing about looking at the actual quality of fan
completely
subs.
Different.
Yeah, it's like, no, that's not how you
insert Google Translate here. No,
pretty much. My favorite was a recent translation of Yorikuma Arashi, where one of the lines was translated, "Don't worry, I'll be Daishobu," which is Japanese for "I'll be okay," basically. But they just did not translate that Japanese word. It's like you translated half of it. Why wouldn't you translate the other half of the word sentence? Bizarre. Anyway, but yeah, it's very, very strange.
Moo means moo. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them out there. That are just a riot.
Mm-hmm. People die when you are killed. Which anyway. Yeah. So.
Translators notes.
Translators notes on the translators.
You know, that's what got me about Dojin work was some of the comments from the translators sort of telling about the culture that, you know, and of course the famous phrase, "Excuse me, miss, you dropped your porn." This didn't show up in the translation that when it finally made its way to the US release. The same concept got pointed across, but that phrasing of it just seemed so absurd and embarrassing that the humor was a little bit muted when I got to the English translation that was the official release rather than the fan sub. So sometimes they have it over on the folks, sometimes not.
Yeah, totally depends. So cycling back to the overall question, I think if nothing else, it's important to have a set of ethical choices that you've determined for yourself. I think it's important to think about the fact that spending money on anime does support the industry in a direct and clear way, much more than attention does. Right? Attention is nice, but don't pay the bills. So I think having some system for when you spend money is important to have, and figuring out how to do that in a way that you feel does the best for everyone involved in the industry, I think is important.
I agree.
Yeah. And so obviously we'll all find slightly different points at which to jump from one to the other. And I think, you know, to our earlier point, we both watch fan subs. We both find anime in lots of different ways, and that's how to approach it. And it is to realize that we live in a world in which there are lots of different ways of accessing this, and we have to find our moral compass within that to figure out how to support everyone as best we can with the resources we have.
Yeah, I don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Exactly. Dee, if you want to send us some posters, we'll be happy to swap these up. But I actually don't have that many posters.
Dee, I have to apologize to you. I've been meaning to send you something in the mail. It has been a crazy busy few weeks for me. So something will get out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, we could change up our set a little bit, and some of our posters. You may have noticed we swapped around a few things on our set. You're looking a little bit more directly at us, and thanks to our feedback from folks who I don't know if we should mention on air or not.
Thanks to fans for their feedback. As somebody in the chat room mentioned, this is getting off topic. How nice it would be to do a weekly live stream showing anime. I'd love to do that. I used to do that a lot on this, but not so much on YouTube Live.
You know, I've been pondering the potential of doing this, of having two simultaneous streams. One would be our stream where you're seeing us here on YouTube Live, where we have the chat room, and possibly having a second stream off of a VLC player or something where we could provide a URL for folks who are watching just for that immediate time.
Yeah, we'll have to
figure it out, but it would have to be stuff that is ethically sound. We don't want to get any of the folks mad at us for copyright infringement.
Yeah, we're not going to be streaming FMA or anything.
No.
But it would be great to show a lot of that more obscure stuff.
And then we might even be able to use examples with audio clips or something.
Yeah.
We just don't want to get in trouble with Google for that kind of you get blacklisted.
Well, and not just Google, but industry folks in general. I mean,
we support the industry.
Yeah, we want to stay on their good side, and we don't want to.
They're kind enough to grant us interviews, and
exactly. Mhm. All right. I think that's covered it pretty well. I think we covered quite a bit on this topic. So I hope you'll join us next week, where we'll be talking about the question of NEETs and hikikomori and whether we have those in America, i.e. shut-ins and other such, what that looks like in America and what we can do about it. So does that whole world of shut-ins and people who kind of really don't interact with other people, does that exist in the US? Yeah. And is it something to be concerned about? Is it something to sort of deal with? So
all you folks out there who want to do some homework, watch Welcome to the NHK. Because it's a great show that deals with a lot of those issues.
Research it first. I would say that. First. Yeah, there's some aspects to it that I would research it first.
Research
there's
it first.
Some, yeah.
There's some things you want to be aware of. Yeah, there's definitely some things you want to be careful of. Now that I think about it, now that I'm remembering the rest of the story, definitely research it before you, because there's some take it all with a grain of salt and in context and
yeah. All right. So thank you all very much. As always, great chat room, great group, and we will see you all next week. Take care. Be awesome.
Yeah.